Yo, welcome back to the Crossup Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jeremy, along with Daquan. So this one is a little bit different. This is like a little shorter type of content. We're gonna call it probably Dev Cycles. That name sounds okay, right?
Yeah, it's work in progress, but yeah, let's roll
Work
with that.
work in progress, absolutely. So the purpose of this shorter content is basically giving more people insight of like what happens behind game dev, like what is actually game dev. And for this one, we're gonna go over pre-production, which includes a lot of things. You know, like first of all, like what would you say, the point?
Well, first thing, I guess the base definition for pre-production is just you getting your thoughts together for trying to understand the scope and the processes that you would have to pretty much follow to get to the next point in your development. Um, a misconception is that pre-production is only like before you get to a certain point in game development, but again, that kind of happens, it rolls, especially have larger teams. So it's just at any point you have to come back to the drawing board to come up with processes and workflows to get to a solution.
Right.
So
Yeah. So that can go back
yeah.
as like pitching the game, right? That's pretty much the start of where these things can happen.
Yeah, definitely for the pitching, but even again, before you get to the pitching part, it's like trying to get to something playable or even, I mean, I guess technically it all just comes back down to pitching. Yeah, if you're in the space trying to get published, 100% just immediately comes back down to pitching. It has to be done in order for somebody to take you serious. Because if not, you're gonna get laughed out, or they just will ignore those emails. I can tell you from experience, they will do both. Um, but yeah, definitely important for pitches. Um, with those pitches as well, I highly recommend for anybody that is solo developer, small team, that you make sure that you take interest and really sit down to focus on the pre-production if you're trying to pitch, because that information is valuable for the publisher or the partner, whichever one you're going for, or if you're just looking for a VC. They need to know how you are thinking about spending your time and how you've already spent your time. In pre-production, a lot of that is value time to be tracked. So
Right.
just keep that in mind going forward through this conversation.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that pre-production makes or breaks a game, because even in like once you get past pre-production, which we'll talk about in a later episode, once you get past that, you can still reiterate on things and still change processes of how things are ran or done or implemented or coded or whatever it is. But pre-production is where most of those conversations should start with every department.
And depending on how it's set up, because again, you have like that AAA, AA, indie, solo person type of setup. Those can be big conversations, small conversations, overly bloated conversations. Um, Depending on the size of the studio, that pre-production can also be one of the most costly portions of that development cycle. Especially if certain games get into what they call development hell. Pre-production is one of those options or avenues that games can get stuck. Which again, R&D or any type of research to figure out what type of game you can be making also like kind of flows into this. So you can pretty much get real caught up in
Yeah,
a cycle for pre-production.
right.
So
One game that comes to mind about development. Well, actually, maybe two games that come to mind right now. One recently is
mm,
Beyond Good and Evil 2, which I've heard is in development hell. That game's been
yeah,
announced like 30 years ago. Uh, it hasn't even
yeah,
seen the light. It hasn't even seen anything. Another game that was in development hell for maybe 10 years was Final Fantasy 15. That game
15.
eventually
Yep,
came out. It's a good game. I
it
wonder,
is.
like the difference. I wonder if it's like between American pre-production and that's a whole different topic we can discuss
Yeah, that's
later
a
on. But like
yeah.
the difference between American pre-production style and Japanese pre-production. I wonder what's the big difference there.
Yeah. I think there's like a lot of variables. The one thing I can definitely say for being in production, seeing a bunch of different departments come in together. If people don't have a clear voice in the room, and if they are not all passionate about doing what they're doing, you will get nowhere.
Right.
There's always going to be maybe those one or two people that have their agendas like, oh, I'm going to be a director this time, or, I got my own ideas, or somebody's like, well, my people matter. And this, I mean, sure, everybody's peoples matter, but when it comes down to these larger decisions that have to be made, it's from some of the studios that I have been in and associated with, and people I've known in other locations. It seems to be for the American studios, it's very difficult to get people to agree and settle down
Hmm.
um, on actual like combined ideas.
Yeah.
So and it's just me. I have a feeling that our the more eastern counterparts do not have that issue to a degree. I've seen a lot of like their dev logs and some of the people that talk, and they just seem to have like focused passion.
Right.
So yeah,
Because
I don't know. I think we're getting
in
bloated.
just a little bit, uh, but I think in like Japan, they view games more as a hobby than we do.
Yeah,
I definitely seen that somewhere. I don't remember where, but I definitely can get that sentiment. So that might be like part of their like maybe I don't know pre-production talks or something like that. Um, what I wanted to bring up is we talk about meetings, pitching, but none of this happens without the people, which comes down to
yeah.
budgets.
All the people, all the budgeting. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Honestly,
in
it could
this
be
current
its
in this current industry right now, yeah, it's been pretty hot. Not yeah, I don't know how else to describe it. Layoffs after layoffs. Just yesterday, unfortunately, X Defiant Ubisoft game got canceled, basically, and they laid off like 300 people.
yeah.
So, but I
I do
digress.
feel bad about that one. I actually enjoyed that game for a little bit, but I mean, again, for the idea that they were pretty much trying to figure out what that game was for like what 6 years?
Yeah,
Was it 6 years they was working on that thing?
it was a
It's
long while.
it's a long time, especially for the amount of resources you got to pool to make a game like that happen.
Hmm.
It's in the same conversation as like Concord, which to the point of the fact that something like Final Fantasy 15 can bounce back and still be a very much appreciated game, even
Hmm.
though it took as long as it did, compared to something like X Defiant. um, I think at the end of the day, for personnel, budgeting aside, because again, I think that that's a whole topic. For personnel, it's very important to get your key stakeholders, for people that will carry this project, but also, like I mentioned, people that have the passion and they are the pillars for what you're trying to get done. Um, Whenever somebody can't decide on those things, it definitely costs early and late,
Hmm.
because, like we mentioned, the pre-production is kind of ever flowing throughout the process of game dev.
Right.
Um, and the more times you have to make those stops, the more expensive it gets, because you just keep getting more directors, more managers, more team leads, more senior staff, all the above. And those people are, again, like your most expensive
Right.
people. So,
Right. Uh, from a
yeah.
AAA standpoint, I'm not gonna say you have a lot of leeway, but you have some
Mm.
leeway to push a game back. Not not saying that you
Not
should.
indefinitely.
Not
Yeah, yeah,
indefinitely. No.
that.
There is still money that you have to reserve. But like in
Mm.
indies, you don't have that luxury of like you know wasting money.
Yeah, you really don't. Um, and that's also another misconception people have for indie versus AAA. is that, oh, you're an independent person, you can just, work your hours, do what you want, make the game that you want. It's like, no, not really,
No.
because like you mentioned,
Yeah.
they don't have the overhead, they don't have the cushion to just be like, yeah, no, we got an extra, like, 3 years of resources just on standby, so we can do what we need to do in between time.
Hmm.
um with the AAA, yeah, they can't, obviously, nothing is just paused indefinitely unless you're beyond good and evil, I guess.
I
um
guess, dude. It's been like 40 years.
yeah, we'll probably be 50 by the time we see that game.
Yeah.
But I just, yeah, for AAA, you can really realistically get away with whatever you thought the development was times maybe 1.5. Like, you might get an extra 2 years
Hmm.
before it becomes like insanity to like continue the process. Which I guess goes into the ultimate question, how long
It's too long for
is
pre-production.
too long?
Right. Like realistically, how
um,
long is too long?
I honestly think more than 4 years is too long.
Hmm.
I think more than 4 years. For indie, honestly, indie games, I would say that it would be anything more than 2 years.
Hmm.
And I'm only saying that because at that point you ask yourself, like, what game are you trying to make, and how much have you already spent in this process? Because for indie, it's more than just the money. It's like for most indies that are really focused on their game, it's also like your mental health. You're like the only person. You got the constant stress of, what happens if this doesn't do well, if that doesn't do da da da. So many pressures. When you're in AAA space, you pretty much got to worry about, like, what is my specific role. So yeah, 4 years, 4 years at max. Because anything further, you're just bleeding. You're just bleeding people
Bleeding the
and
pig dry.
projects. Yeah, pretty much. There's
Yeah.
this. Yeah, I can't think of a reason for a game to be more than 4 years in development. It's just kind of rough.
I mean, nowadays, like I seen this on LinkedIn. Somebody said teams are too big, budgets are overdone.
Yep.
He's not wrong. Like it takes how many studios to make one Call of Duty? Like five?
I, I think the official report for the Microsoft stuff when it was going through the acquisition, I think they put down 1.5 studios. But that number will be what it is. we
Yeah.
could just we could accept the numbers on paper. But even with that idea, like, that number can be down there for how many studios official, but even Activision aside, most studios are still getting outsourcing. They're probably not including their QA into that conversation. They're not including any, like, associative studios within the broader umbrella if they're part of a parent company.
Hmm.
Um, it takes a lot of people to pull together the, like, honestly, if folks want to look at those credits, they will be able to figure out how many studios it takes to
Yeah.
make these
And you
games.
mentioned QA when we'll get to that topic later because
Yeah,
oh boy,
yeah,
we got some
good
opinions.
old QA.
Good old QA. Marketing is marketing part of pre-production.
I say yes, specifically because
But
the thing
Daquan,
is,
the game's not even coming out yet. What are you talking about?
now it's not out yet, but for the idea that for some traction, and for the idea of, like, Elon Musk and his little cyber event that occurred, he had a bunch of, well, not even a bunch. There was some blowback from investors where there was a decent dip in Tesla stock. Um, it's good for folks to see if they are investors or people that are, financial stakeholders. It's good for them to get information early on what that project looks like before they able to, like, do multiple injections. Like, they might do like one round of seed, or like one, seed round or whatever, and then they're on to the next one. And then they realize, like, okay, well, by the third one is when you're getting to where you're like having an alpha build, and you're kind of just now coming out of pre-production, and that entire time you still needed that research, and beforehand, to, like, really solidify that you deserve a third round of funding.
Yeah.
um, and for the other part of that, if you are a publisher, it's good to kind of gauge your audience, especially for like the game Avowed when they put out that trailer when the game was nowhere near ready to be seen by anybody. They got enough excitement from folks to be like, okay, we can take risk, we can move forward. People are excited about we're making this game, so they're not concerned about the fact that, oh, will people receive an RPG from us. It's just like, okay, they like the aesthetic, now we're just going to run with it and see what happens. um, on the financial side, it is good to do the marketing to understand what your marketing budget might be so that you can get a good idea for how much a game is going to cost in total. Because whether people believe it or not, your marketing budget is normally larger than the actual development budget.
Right.
So it's good to have an idea early so you can have those conversations with your publishers or
Mhm.
with your investors. So I would say it's a good idea, but I see from the consumer and the player how it's just annoying.
Here, and here's my counterpoint. Why
Yeah.
on earth are we announcing a game
Hmm.
with no date, no gameplay, just a title on the screen? And we talked about this before to appease
We
shareholders,
did.
but at the same
Yeah.
time, for consumers, it's like, why are we don't care. We just want
Yeah, we don't
we
care.
don't care.
Yeah.
So why
I
why why should why should they care about just a word on the screen?
I don't think they should, and honestly, I think it's an old tactic that's kind of just outdated. It used to be in, Xbox 360 times or PlayStation 2 time. You saw a logo on the screen and you're just so hyped because the mystery of like what kind of game can come out now. Um, I think the people may have been like disillusioned from hype for new types of games because they know it's going to be the same game they played already.
Because
Um,
like the funny thing is, you can put a word on the screen. The game's not even in pre-production yet.
that is true.
Like it's just
That
there,
is
just to
true.
just a teaser that means nothing.
Yeah. I mean, unless, uh, well, I mean, I don't know about saying unless it's like God of War, they just tease the logo or something.
Mm-hmm.
People might be excited. I think it's also the rapport of the studio.
Mm-hmm.
Because for CD Projekt Red, if they were making Witcher 4,
Yeah.
and all they did was post an image of like Siri picking up a pistol and like walking out of a room, I feel like that would have a very large effect on their user base. Like it'd just be like, whatever it is, take my money. Like they're on board. It's Siri pistol, take her to the future, whatever the situation would be. I think it'd just be contextual per game, but I will agree that I don't think it should be done. I
Yeah.
think it's kind of stupid.
It is
I think it's a waste of time.
outdated probably at this point,
Yeah.
like you said. Two more things. Uh,
Mhm.
First thing, we mentioned director meetings, producer meetings. Should the average game dev employee be a part of these pre-production talks, or should they just be waiting in the wind until they've been told what to do?
I say wait in the wind. Honestly, this was kind of weird because it honestly depends on how big the studio is.
Mhm.
So if you're more than like 200 people, your guy's just gonna have to be on standby until the leads get done with the conversations. Um, but if you're like 100 people, I think you can get a town hall and like have specific groups where everyone is involved.
Can they do the same thing
Um,
with just Zoom? With more than 200 people?
no, that's insane. No, let's no.
Give them the ability to all talk
Uh,
at the same time?
oh, that sounds horrible. No, I'd be thinking of clusters. Like it would be you have the whoever the person is coming up with the main project. You have the person that you want for art, the person you want for your audio director, your animation director. You have these people sit down, and then the creative directors sit down, have whatever conversation, say like, "Hey, here's my idea." Break out to your team, start brainstorming, figure some stuff out. I think at that point, once the directors are dispersed and they're going to their leads and they're talking to the leads, at that level, I think a team of under 200 can have insight. Like I
Mhm.
think it's fine for that to happen. But those are like clustered, conversations. Any bigger, then it's just going to be down to task delegation because you can't have every junior, every mid-level, every anybody, even multiple seniors. It won't make sense to have them on so many meetings for decision making.
Mhm.
So if you're above 200, I say maybe don't do that.
Right.
Under 200, use your discretion, but keep in mind time is resources.
And one thing I forgot to
So
mention was that part of this pre-production is also choosing what engine you're using, whether that's Unreal, Unity, or a proprietary engine. That all factors
yeah,
into not only just meetings but like budgets and who's actually going to work on the game.
yeah, yeah. It's the engine part is very tricky because technically you can't answer that until you start sitting down to really understand what game you're trying to make. But at the same time, you could constrain that game and say, look, we're only going to use Unreal because we don't use Unity and we're not making our own engine. Um, I'm projecting a little bit here, but we're only going to use Unreal. um, look, I'm
It
just
is
going
the
to put it
most
out here.
accessible game engine out there. Just saying.
If you're doing pre-production and you're an indie or you're smaller studio, really take a look at what these um at the support for these different engines. Think about what type of people you're trying to hire, especially when it comes down to something like Unity versus Unreal, because you want engineers, they got to know C++, or they could be good at just understanding the visual scripting. If you're going for Unity, then you're going to need C Sharp. You're going to need people that can understand Unity stuff. And then on top of that, most of the plugins are going to be slightly different from if you just wanted like more of the generic type of setups that you can get with Unreal. Proprietary, just don't do it. You're not in pre-production. If you're talking about proprietary, you're before pre-production. So that one just
That's
don't do
that's
it.
a very tricky one to do.
Yeah, that's like if you don't have an engine already,
Just abandon it.
abandon it. Unless you're the guy that did Stardew Valley, but I think it took him 6 years to make that game.
Hmm.
And I think he used like some Microsoft scripting.
I
Um,
didn't know that. That's crazy.
yeah, but like all in all, definitely that engine is like the third largest component in any part of like the game development conversation, and it needs to be figured out in pre-production. So if you saying that you're going to move forward and make a game and you haven't answered that question, you're still in pre-production. Figure that out.
Yeah,
Just
right.
go into it.
So
Um,
I'm trying to figure out how
yeah.
to phrase this question about the consumer. If the game isn't actually in pre-production, so the
Mm,
consumer actually care what's happening in pre-production. So like, maybe
yeah.
this might be an example. An early access game, is that pre-production
Mm.
or is that in production?
Ooh, that's a rolling production. It's I would put it as way more of a water flow type of situation. Not water flow, waterfall. Uh, I think it's definitely more like waterfall method. You just get tasks and you kind of just like we have stuff to do and we're going to take what we can take as the timeline moves forward.
Right.
Because I don't think if it's an early access, the entire game at this point is a feedback loop and you're just reacting and reassessing and replanning and then executing. So if it's in early access, I think I would consider that game technically still in pre-production.
So you know what that means, right?
What?
Star Citizen is a pre-production, folks. Pre-production.
It's I I know it's gonna be some blowback on this for anybody that takes a look and is like, but
Oh
honestly,
man.
like yeah, honestly, so there are stages in the game development where it's like, okay, we've gotten to feature complete, we've gotten to alpha, beta, we reach gold on the platform.
Which things are these things are things we're gonna talk about for sure.
Yeah, we'll get to those things, but it's like I think for the idea, if you are not feature complete, yeah. So if you're not feature complete, and if you have not solidified all of your game functionalities, like if you do not have the core of your game figured out and your feature complete is not you're not check marked on like all the systems to begin that actually like, oh, this is my game. We just don't have art, we just don't have da da da. If that's not there, I would still say that person is definitely still in pre-production, and especially in Star Citizen's situation, they have assets, and they do have stuff that you can do right now, but their game is still very fragmented and stuff doesn't connect, and they're kind of just rolling with the punches. So I love that game, but yeah, yeah, they've been in production hell for a while.
One
So
day I'll get to
that's
play it. So
one day,
one day.
one day on PlayStation.
Oh,
I'm
oh,
joking. No, no.
who
On
knows, dude?
PlayStation 10.
Well, hey, this was a good one, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And as Jeremy mentioned, we'll definitely talk more about the rest of the processes for like what it means to get to different stages in the development process. Um, but again, I do want to harp on definitely think about your time as value. Your time as value equals your time like money spent. So again, you take however much time that you think you're worth, and then you just figure out how long you've been doing something, put that together on a piece of paper, and then really you can tell yourself how much you have spent on a project because it's useful going to publishers, partners, whoever you're trying to get these resources from. But
Yeah.
also it keeps you in track of understanding how much it costs for you to develop a project. So pre-production,
Sounds
important,
sounds good, dude.
important.
This has been the first of many dev cycles. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think about it in the comments. What do you think about pre-production? So, all
Yeah.
right, cool. See you next time.
Peace.